Hello, everybody. Well, it's when I was asked to talk about some of the work that we do in Singapore. I wasn't quite sure how to begin, but I think that I'll talk about some of the cross-cultural work which we are doing presently with many different Asian countries, so that you can see where the work is pitched and a concern with being at the border. I mean, how do you negotiate cultures? How do you negotiate different time spaces? Because with a lot of these traditional artists, they are not just coming from another culture, another space, but it's also almost another time in which the way they perceive their work and their worldview beyond the dance form or the theatre form is very, very much different from my worldview, from your worldview. So I'm going to be speaking in English. So first of all, apologies for not being able to speak in German. And I hope that when I'm going too fast, please, because English is my first language, so please stop me and I will repeat the material if needs be. I think that, first of all, let me just give a sense of what this Flying Circus project is, which we started in 1996. I had returned from New York studying at NYU, working with Professor Richard Schechner, who is one of the early exponents of intercultural theatre. And I had just returned from there, and I was thinking of how do I feel about the cultural mix which exists in myself and in my country. In myself, because being Chinese, from second generation Singaporean Chinese, meaning that my parents came from China. How do I deal with the multiple realities within myself? I speak to my parents in Chinese, but I use English 90% of the time. So, you know, you have a certain kind of like a code switching happening as you move from home to outside. And you also begin to realize the code switching is not just in language, but it's almost in self. Meaning that there are two different selves, at least two different selves within me, whereby I am switching not just the language, but almost the entire psyche. And I think that language starts to affect you in very, very deep ways, in the sense that language is, like I speak in English, and I think I dream in English, but I cannot say for sure. But what is sure is that it definitely affects your internal landscape, your imagination. So from very young, when we talked about nature, maybe I saw English meadows. You know, I don't think that I saw nature as in tropical trees. When I read English classics in studying literature, I think that I was very, very affected by the way in which ideas were phrased and thoughts were phrased. And it is a tragedy in Singapore, I think, that I have to read Chinese classics in translation. You know, I know Chinese, I write Chinese, I speak Chinese, but not well enough to stand before you all and give a lecture in Chinese and to talk philosophically, to argue in Chinese. And I used to think that this was a loss. But I think that it's also a step towards a certain hybridity. And it's a step towards a reinvention of my identity as a modern Chinese, living away from the cultural center of China. I think that people from Hong Kong and Taiwan are very, very different because they're very close to the cultural center and political center and the threat of China as an all-consuming presence. But in Singapore, it's a part of, it's as far away as Berlin. Beijing is as far away as Berlin. So I think that in that sense, or as near as Berlin, in that sense, I think that how do I reconcile my various selves? How do I find the hybridity? And how do I make the hybridity into a strength rather than a loss? Rather than because you become a mixed breed, you start to become necessarily weaker than the origin or the source or the authentic source in inverted quotation marks. This is also because I personally feel that in my pursuit of identity, I dislike the term authentic, or the search for authenticity, I think is a fallacy, because there is no, in my view, there is once you try to search for that, you are in a sense searching for the impossible, and in a sense you are validating one over the other. And what is the authentic Europe holiday, for example? You know, I mean, when we talk about going to Europe for a holiday, we have a certain a view, and we say, oh, that's very European. But what does that mean? Just like you all would say that, oh, that's very Asian, that's very exotic. But what is in all those phrases that we use so conveniently and so quickly when we say that we want an authentic Asian experience? And possibly going to Singapore may not be an authentic Asian experience because we are so modern. So these were the early thoughts which made me think about cultural borders. As I said, not only within myself, but also the country which I come from, where we are about 3.4 million people living on an island, very small, probably the size of Manhattan, where you can traverse one end to the other end in 1 hour. And we all build upwards, so we live in, it's not unusual for us to be in apartments of 30 floors. And how do you live in a country where you can actually speak a language which somebody else does not? How do you live in a country like my mother, for example, whose imagination of Singapore has changed so much in the last 30 years? If she went out by herself, she's now in her 70s, if she went out by herself, she may not be able to find her way back home. The landscape has changed so much in the country itself. What you remember as the street of your past is no longer there. And this reinvention of the nation, I mean the invention of the nation and the reinvention of culture is a constant living process in Singapore. Just like what is happening in Berlin now, where it's constantly reinventing itself. And I think that this transformation, this agitation of what was the past, this agitation is a very valid and very powerful state to be in. And so in that sense, I would think that the work which I'm doing is constantly agitating these borders, these perceptions, these stereotypes, and at the same time, I think that I'm hopeful that I'm negotiating these borders. Yeah. So I will start the Flying Circus project. Now, the Flying Circus project was started in 1996, and it had two big aims. One was to look at how the contemporary art, contemporary artistic expression would be revitalized, reconnected in some instances, and would be, in a sense, reinvented by some kind of juxtaposition with tradition. So with that in mind, it meant that we had to engage quite deeply with traditional masters. In 1996, we invited 50 artists in dance, music, and theatre to Singapore from 7 different countries, from China, from Japan, from Vietnam, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Thailand, and from Singapore. So these 50 artists came together, and the second aim was that we would look at traditional performing arts not as a museum culture, but that we would try to look at tradition as a living process, something that is organic, something that is constantly evolving, something which we wouldn't go to the museum and see a gamelan set, for example, and in a sense relate to it as a kind of a foreign culture or an encrusted culture. And with these two aims, it meant that we had to look at what is behind the process of coming together in this way. Of course, it is already a political act because this project was initiated by Asians. It happened in Asia. It was funded by Asian money. And I think so far there has been a lot of these collaborations. I mean, Eugenio Baba has been quite major in doing some of this work. Peter Brook, of course, and sometimes it's very specific to a production. But the political act of Asians coming together to talk about how we want our art to be perceived, how what is behind the art form, I think was the starting premise, and it meant that therefore we had to find a dialogue which was based on autonomy, empowerment, and equality, which means that a vision for the laboratory, it was a laboratory in many ways, and I'll explain why. A vision for it was to be eked out by everybody. It wasn't like the artists were coming to work on, let's say, my master plan, but that we came together and we had to find a collective vision. And it was very interesting because the music space or the music laboratory collapsed on the first day because the music leaders all decided that there were two music leaders, one from Indonesia and one from Singapore, and they decided that they didn't want to lead. They wanted everybody to have a say, and which meant that there was total chaos, total anarchy. But that state was itself interesting because it meant that we had to find a way to truly negotiate without a plan. So I think it's important that when we come together with many cultures, it is important that the vision is found rather than that the vision has already been masterminded and cultures are fitting in. Yeah. So I will go into some of the slides, and maybe from there you'll get a clearer sense of what the work is about. And as I talk through the slides, I will also give certain perspectives, certain issues of appropriation which were there, certain issues of cultural negotiation. Okay, let's see how this works. Can we have the lights off? Yeah, thanks. Okay, this was the Thai master in mask, and it was just the first day where he started with the worship of the mask, which meant that it was just a starting process which quite a few actors felt very uncomfortable with because they were staunch Christians, and they felt that they should not be in a situation where they were worshipping certain Thai masks. And it became a point where there was a contest of culture, and the master, Kun Chaturong, had to deal with it. And he dealt with it in a way which I think immediately reinforced the notion that tradition is living, tradition is organic. He said that, well, if you don't want to worship the mask, you don't have to. Just take that moment of silence with us, and in a sense, if you are genuine in relationship to the mask, you would find your harmony with it. So that was totally interesting because it was a contemporary artist who was like up in arms and saying that no, I don't want to do this. This is I didn't come to the laboratory to be involved in some kind of mumbo jumbo religion. And I think that this is where a lot of the issues which were coming up in the laboratory space, the 4 weeks that we spent together, and when I say spent together, we started from 10 o'clock and we went on to 11 at night. So 10 in the morning to 11 at night. And we were all bused to one place, like maybe the house, and we spent the whole day there. And we were eating together, working together, thinking together, fighting together. And it was a very, very interesting experience because it thrived on displacement. We were all displaced from our home cultures. We were all outside of what we were familiar with. And just like the Brechtian theory of displacement, alienation, distanciation, the Fremdungseffekt effect, I mean, we were very much in that kind of situation. And in fact, some of the musicians were saying that it was a very unnatural situation to be in because constantly we were working in many different languages. You know, every time during lunch break or dinner break, we'll zoom into the interpreters, right? So we all like run to the interpreter and say, can we have lunch with you? Can you sit with us so that we can talk to, let's say, the Indonesian dancer?